Captain Maya Roberts adjusted her crisp white pilot's uniform as she walked confidently through the airport terminal. Her navy blue pants and polished shoes reflected the high standards she set for herself. Maya had been flying planes for years, and she loved her job. Today was no different, even though the terminal was unusually crowded and full of impatient passengers. As she approached the boarding gate for her next flight, Maya couldn't help but notice a commotion nearby. An older woman in an elegant beige suit was standing at the customer service counter, her voice loud enough to echo across the terminal. The woman, later identified as Karen, looked visibly frustrated, waving her hands dramatically as she complained about the delay in boarding her flight. "This is unacceptable," Karen exclaimed. "I have a schedule to keep, and I expect better service than this." The airline staff at the counter tried their best to calm her down, but Karen wasn't in the mood to listen. She crossed her arms and tapped her foot impatiently, making sure everyone around her could see her displeasure. Maya, who had overheard bits of the conversation, knew she would be piloting Karen's flight. She sighed quietly but kept walking toward the gate. Maya was used to dealing with difficult situations, both in the air and on the ground. As a black female pilot, she had faced her fair share of challenges and prejudices. She had learned to handle them with grace and professionalism. Just as Maya passed Karen, the older woman's sharp eyes landed on her uniform. Karen's expression shifted from frustration to disbelief. "Excuse me," Karen called out loudly, stepping in front of Maya. "Are you with the airline?" Maya stopped, her professional smile firmly in place. "Yes, ma'am. I'm Captain Maya Roberts. I'll be piloting your flight today." For a moment, Karen looked stunned. Then her expression hardened. "You're the pilot?" she asked, her tone dripping with skepticism. "Are you sure? You don't look like a pilot." Maya felt the weight of the comment but didn't let it show. She had heard similar remarks before, and she knew better than to let them rattle her. "Yes, ma'am," she said calmly. "I've been flying for several years. Your flight is in good hands." But Karen wasn't finished. She crossed her arms and raised her voice, drawing attention from nearby passengers. "I just find it hard to believe," she said loudly. "I mean, no offense, but I've never seen someone like you as a pilot. Shouldn't they have someone more experienced?" The terminal grew quieter as people began to notice the exchange. Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she remained calm. "I can assure you, ma'am," she replied evenly, "I am fully qualified and experienced. My team and I are committed to your safety and comfort." Karen shook her head, clearly unimpressed. "This is ridiculous," she muttered. "I want to speak to someone in charge. I don't feel comfortable with this." A nearby passenger, a man in his 30s, spoke up. "Are you serious, lady?" he said, his tone incredulous. "She's a pilot. Just let her do her job." Karen turned sharply toward him, her face red with anger. "This has nothing to do with you," she snapped. "I'm entitled to express my concerns." Maya stepped in before the situation could escalate. "Ma'am, if you have any questions or concerns, I'd be happy to address them. Otherwise, I need to prepare for the flight." Karen huffed but didn't respond. She stepped back, muttering under her breath. Maya gave her a polite nod and continued toward the gate, her head held high. She had faced situations like this before, and she knew they wouldn't be the last. As Maya walked away, the crowd began murmuring. Some passengers shook their heads in disbelief at Karen's behavior, while others whispered words of support for Maya. A young girl standing with her parents watched Maya intently, her eyes wide with admiration. For Maya, it was just another day on the job. But for Karen, the lesson she was about to learn would be one she'd never forget. The terminal buzzed with quiet murmurs as Captain Maya Roberts walked toward the gate. Though she kept her composure, she could feel the weight of the stares and whispers following her. Maya had long ago learned to focus on what mattered, getting her passengers safely to their destination. Still, Karen's comments lingered in her mind, not because they were unusual, but because they reminded her how far society still had to go. Karen, meanwhile, stood near the gate, fuming. She wasn't used to being questioned or ignored, and Maya's calm response had left her flustered. "I can't believe this," Karen muttered under her breath, loud enough for a few nearby passengers to hear. "Who put her in charge of a plane?" A young mother standing nearby gave Karen a sharp look but chose not to engage. Her young daughter, however, tugged at her sleeve and whispered, "Mom, is that lady really a pilot? She looks so cool." "She is, sweetheart," the mother said, smiling, "and she's probably very good at her job." Karen overheard this and scoffed, rolling her eyes. "We'll see about that," she muttered, pulling out her phone. She began typing furiously, possibly drafting a complaint or venting to someone about her situation. Meanwhile, Maya reached the gate agents and began discussing the final pre-flight checks. The gate agents greeted her warmly, clearly accustomed to working with her and respecting her professionalism. Maya reviewed the passenger list and weather conditions, ensuring everything was in order for a smooth flight. As she worked, a young man approached her cautiously. He looked to be in his early 20s and had been one of the passengers watching the earlier exchange. "Excuse me, Captain," he said, his tone polite but nervous. "I just wanted to say, you handled that really well. Some people don't know how to treat others with respect, but you didn't let it bother you." Maya looked up from her tablet and gave him a kind smile. "Thank you," she said. "It's important to stay focused on what matters. I have a job to do, and my responsibility is to all of you. That's what I care about." The young man nodded, clearly impressed. "Well, I think you're awesome," he said before walking back to his seat. Maya's smile lingered for a moment before she returned to her tasks. Comments like his were rare but meaningful. They reminded her that not everyone saw the world the way Karen did. Back at the waiting area, Karen's irritation grew. She had spoken to a gate agent, demanding a change of pilot, but her request was met with a firm explanation. "Captain Roberts is one of our most experienced pilots. You're in very good hands." This answer only made Karen angrier. She turned to the passengers seated nearby, hoping to find someone who shared her views. "Don't you think it's a little odd?" Karen asked, her voice dripping with disbelief. "I mean, no offense, but shouldn't they choose someone more traditional for a job like this?" A middle-aged man sitting nearby raised an eyebrow. "Traditional? You mean someone who isn't as qualified as her? Because she seems like she knows exactly what she's doing." Karen opened her mouth to respond, but found herself at a loss for words. She wasn't used to being challenged, and the disapproving looks from other passengers made her feel increasingly isolated. Still, she refused to back down. As the final boarding call was announced, Karen reluctantly joined the line to board the plane. Maya stood near the entrance to the jet bridge, greeting passengers with a warm smile. When it was Karen's turn, she hesitated for a moment, her face flushed with frustration. "Have a safe flight," Maya said, her tone polite and professional. Karen didn't respond. She simply walked past, her chin held high, but the tension in her shoulders betrayed her discomfort. For the first time, she began to wonder if she was in the wrong. The passengers settled into their seats as the plane prepared for takeoff. Karen sat near the front, her arms crossed tightly, while others whispered about the earlier scene. Unbeknownst to her, the flight ahead would challenge her assumptions in a way she never expected. The plane's engines roared to life as the final passengers settled into their seats. The flight attendants moved down the aisles, helping travelers store their belongings and buckle their seatbelts. Karen sat near the front, her arms crossed tightly, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Though she was quiet now, her frustration hadn't disappeared. Instead, it simmered beneath the surface. From the cockpit, Captain Maya Roberts prepared the plane for takeoff. Her co-pilot, a friendly man named Brian, glanced at her and smiled. "Everything's looking good, Captain," he said. "Perfect," Maya replied, her voice calm and steady. She adjusted her headset and made a quick announcement over the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. This is your captain, Maya Roberts, speaking. Welcome aboard Flight 847. We're expecting clear skies and a smooth journey. Thank you for flying with us." Her voice echoed through the cabin, and most passengers smiled, reassured by her confidence. Karen, however, frowned deeply. She shifted in her seat, muttering, "I still can't believe they let her fly the plane." A young woman seated across the aisle overheard Karen and turned toward her. "You know," she said softly, "it's incredible that we have someone like her flying this plane. She's clearly worked hard to be where she is." Karen shot her a sharp look. "That's not the point," she replied. "I just don't feel comfortable. Flying is serious business, and I'd prefer someone more traditional." The young woman raised an eyebrow. "More traditional? Or someone who fits your outdated idea of what a pilot should look like?" Karen didn't respond. Instead, she turned her gaze toward the window, choosing to ignore the growing judgment from those around her. Meanwhile, Maya and Brian guided the plane smoothly into the sky. The takeoff was seamless, and soon, the aircraft reached its cruising altitude. The flight attendants began moving through the cabin, offering snacks and drinks. Maya, satisfied with the plane's steady course, leaned back slightly in her seat. "Good start to the flight," Brian remarked. Maya nodded. "Let's hope it stays that way." In the cabin, the atmosphere began to relax. Passengers chatted quietly, flipped through magazines, or watched movies on their screens. Even Karen seemed to calm down slightly, though her posture remained stiff. She sipped her drink and glanced around the cabin, still annoyed by the earlier interactions. But peace didn't last long. Suddenly, a loud beep sounded through the plane. A flight attendant rushed down the aisle toward the middle rows, where a man had slumped over in his seat. His face was pale, and his breathing was shallow. Passengers gasped, craning their necks to see what was happening. "We need help," the flight attendant called out. "Is there a doctor or medical professional on board?" The cabin fell silent for a moment. Then Maya's voice came over the intercom. "This is your captain. We've been informed of a medical emergency. If anyone on board has medical training, please notify a flight attendant immediately." Karen's heart raced. She watched anxiously as the flight attendants tried to assist the man, but it was clear they needed more help. The tension in the cabin grew, and passengers whispered nervously among themselves. Then, to Karen's surprise, Maya emerged from the cockpit. Her uniform was as pristine as ever, and her expression was calm but focused. "I'm certified in basic emergency medicine," she told the flight attendants. "Let me help." Karen stared in disbelief as Maya knelt beside the man, checking his pulse and assessing his condition with practiced skill. The passengers around her began to murmur. "Wow, she's incredible," one man whispered. "She's not just a pilot, she's a lifesaver," another added. Karen felt a lump form in her throat. For the first time, she couldn't deny Maya's competence or the respect she commanded. As she watched Maya work, Karen began to realize just how wrong she had been. The tension in the cabin was thick as Captain Maya Roberts knelt beside the unconscious man. The flight attendants quickly handed her the medical kit, their expressions a mix of relief and anxiety. Maya opened the kit with steady hands, her training kicking in as she assessed the situation. "He's breathing, but it's shallow," she said calmly, placing 2 fingers on the man's wrist to check his pulse. "It's weak, but it's there. We need to elevate his legs and keep him stable until we land." The passengers watched in silence, many leaning forward in their seats to get a better view. Maya gave clear instructions to the flight attendants, who quickly followed her lead. One fetched extra oxygen while another helped tilt the man's seat back. Karen sat frozen in her seat, her fingers gripping the armrests tightly. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. The same woman she had insulted and doubted earlier was now in complete control of the situation. Maya's voice was calm, her movements precise, and the passengers seemed to hang on her every word. A middle-aged man seated across the aisle whispered to his companion, "She's incredible. It's like she was born to lead." Karen overheard the comment and shifted uncomfortably in her seat. She wanted to say something, but no words came to mind. For the first time, she felt small, her earlier arrogance replaced by a growing sense of shame. Maya placed the oxygen mask gently over the man's face and adjusted the flow. His breathing began to improve, and color slowly returned to his cheeks. The passengers around him sighed in relief, and a few even clapped softly. "Is he going to be okay?" a woman in the row behind asked, her voice trembling. "He'll be fine for now," Maya replied, her tone reassuring. "But we'll need to get him medical attention as soon as we land. I'll coordinate with the crew to ensure paramedics are ready when we arrive." She stood up and addressed the flight attendants. "I'm heading back to the cockpit to adjust our course for an emergency landing. Please monitor him closely and notify me immediately if his condition changes." "Yes, Captain," one of the attendants replied, her voice filled with respect. As Maya walked back to the cockpit, the passengers couldn't take their eyes off her. Whispers of admiration filled the cabin. "She's not just a pilot," one man said. "She's a hero." Karen, however, felt like the room was spinning. She stared at her lap, her mind racing. Every assumption she had made about Maya had been shattered in an instant. The woman she had doubted and disrespected was not only a skilled pilot, but also a natural leader, someone who remained calm under pressure and put others' needs first. As the plane began its descent, Karen's thoughts were interrupted by an announcement from Maya over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your captain speaking. Due to a medical emergency, we will be making an unscheduled landing at the nearest airport. Please remain seated and follow the instructions of the flight attendants. Thank you for your cooperation." The passengers responded with murmurs of agreement. Even in a tense situation, Maya's voice had a way of calming everyone down. Karen glanced out the window as the plane descended through the clouds. For the first time in years, she felt unsure of herself. Her usual confidence had been replaced by a growing realization of how wrong she had been, not just about Maya, but about the way she viewed others. As the plane touched down smoothly on the runway, Karen found herself whispering, "She's amazing." The young woman across the aisle heard her and smiled. "Took you long enough to see it." Karen didn't reply. She simply nodded, her heart heavy with regret. The lesson she was learning was a painful one, but it was a lesson she knew she needed. The plane taxied smoothly on the runway at the emergency airport, guided by the steady hands of Captain Maya Roberts. Inside the cabin, the atmosphere was thick with a mix of relief and admiration. Passengers exchanged whispers, many glancing toward the cockpit where Maya's calm voice had reassured them moments earlier. Karen sat in silence, her earlier frustration completely replaced by a growing sense of guilt. She had doubted Maya, judged her unfairly, and even voiced her prejudice for everyone to hear. Now she was witnessing Maya's professionalism and leadership firsthand. The experience left her feeling small, but it also opened her eyes to something she had refused to see before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Maya's voice echoed through the speakers, "we have safely landed at the nearest airport. Medical personnel are waiting to assist the passenger in need. Please remain seated until the crew guides you for deboarding. Thank you for your cooperation." Applause erupted in the cabin, a gesture of gratitude for both Maya's piloting and her quick action during the medical emergency. Karen clapped too, though she did so quietly, unsure if she even deserved to join in. As the plane came to a full stop, paramedics boarded quickly and rushed to the man who had fallen ill. Maya stepped out of the cockpit to brief them, her calm demeanor never faltering. She explained his symptoms, the oxygen provided, and the steps she and the flight crew had taken to stabilize him. The paramedics nodded in appreciation, clearly impressed by her knowledge and efficiency. Passengers craned their necks to watch, whispering among themselves. "She's amazing," one woman said. "I've never seen someone handle a situation so well," added another. Karen overheard the comments and felt her face grow hot. She wanted to disappear into her seat, but at the same time, she couldn't stop watching Maya. The respect and admiration Maya commanded from everyone around her were undeniable. The paramedics wheeled the passenger off the plane, and Maya turned back to address the cabin. "Thank you for your patience and understanding," she said, her voice warm and steady. "We'll be back in the air shortly, and I'll ensure we reach our destination as soon as possible." More applause followed as Maya returned to the cockpit. The passengers settled down, some chatting excitedly about what had just happened, while others remained quiet, clearly reflecting on the events. Karen was one of the latter. Her mind raced as she thought about everything she had said and done earlier. She felt a lump in her throat as she realized just how unfair she had been. The young woman across the aisle leaned over and gave Karen a small smile. "Pretty incredible, isn't she?" she said. Karen nodded slowly. "Yes, she is," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. For the first time, Karen felt the urge to apologize, not just for how she had treated Maya, but for the assumptions she had carried with her for so long. It wasn't easy for Karen to admit when she was wrong, but this was different. She couldn't ignore the truth any longer. As the plane prepared to take off again, Karen closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She knew what she needed to do. When the flight was over, she would find Captain Maya Roberts and apologize, not just with words, but with sincerity. She owed Maya that much, and maybe more. The engines roared to life once again, and the plane lifted smoothly into the sky. Karen sat quietly, reflecting on how one remarkable woman had not only proven her wrong, but had also taught her an important lesson about respect, humility, and strength. The plane cruised smoothly at its adjusted altitude, and the atmosphere in the cabin began to settle. Most passengers relaxed into their seats, but Karen remained restless. She couldn't stop thinking about Captain Maya Roberts. Every detail of the day replayed in her mind: the moment she judged Maya unfairly, the comments she had made, and the way Maya had risen above it all with grace and professionalism. Karen glanced around the cabin. People were still whispering about the earlier events, their faces filled with admiration for Maya. Even the flight attendants seemed more upbeat, moving through the aisles with a renewed energy. The respect for the pilot who had handled the medical emergency with such skill was palpable. Karen felt a pang of guilt deep in her chest. She had started the day convinced of her own superiority, certain that her opinions were valid and her judgments justified. But now, after watching Maya's calm and decisive leadership, she realized how wrong she had been. The young woman across the aisle, who had defended Maya earlier, leaned over again. "You know," she said softly, "it's okay to admit when we're wrong. It's how we grow." Karen hesitated, unsure how to respond. She wanted to argue, to explain herself, but she couldn't find the words. Instead, she nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. "I've been wrong before," she admitted quietly. "But this is different." The young woman smiled. "Captain Roberts is something special, isn't she? She's not just a great pilot, she's an incredible person." Karen nodded again, her throat tightening. "I misjudged her," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I thought she didn't belong here. But I see now that she's more capable than I ever gave her credit for." "Then tell her that," the young woman said simply. "It's never too late to apologize." Karen sat back in her seat, staring out the window at the endless sky. She had never been the type to admit her mistakes openly, but something about Maya's quiet strength and dignity made her want to try. Maya had handled everything: the insults, the emergency, and the pressure of the job, with a level of grace Karen could only admire. When the flight attendants began their final rounds to check on passengers, Karen stopped one of them. "Excuse me," she said hesitantly. "Is it possible to speak with the captain after the flight?" The flight attendant tilted her head curiously, but her smile remained polite. "Of course," she said. "I'll let Captain Roberts know." Karen thanked her and sank back into her seat, her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what she would say, but she knew she needed to speak to Maya. For the first time in a long time, Karen felt humbled, and it was a feeling she wasn't used to. As the plane began its descent toward their final destination, Karen's thoughts were interrupted by another announcement from Maya. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are now approaching our destination. Please ensure your seatbelts are fastened, and thank you for flying with us today." Maya's voice was calm and steady, just as it had been throughout the flight. Karen closed her eyes, listening to the confidence in every word. How could she have doubted someone so capable? How could she have let her own prejudice cloud her judgment? The wheels touched down smoothly on the runway, and the passengers broke into applause once again. Karen joined in, clapping louder this time. This wasn't just about a safe landing. It was about celebrating a woman who had earned their respect through her actions. As the plane came to a stop and passengers began gathering their belongings, Karen remained seated, waiting for her chance to apologize. It wasn't going to be easy, but she knew it was the right thing to do. As passengers filed out of the plane, Karen stayed seated, nervously fidgeting with the strap of her handbag. She watched as the others walked down the aisle, some still chatting about Captain Maya Roberts and how skillfully she had handled the entire flight. Karen took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She knew she needed to apologize, but she wasn't sure how Maya would respond. Once the plane was empty, a flight attendant approached her with a polite smile. "Captain Roberts is just outside the cockpit. You're welcome to speak with her now," she said. Karen nodded, her mouth dry. She stood up slowly, clutching her bag, as if it were a shield. Walking toward the cockpit, she felt every step grow heavier with the weight of her guilt. Maya stood at the cockpit door, talking quietly with her co-pilot. Her uniform was still immaculate, and her posture radiated confidence. When she noticed Karen approaching, Maya turned and gave her a polite but neutral smile. "Hello, ma'am," Maya said, her tone professional. "Is there something I can help you with?" Karen hesitated for a moment, then took a deep breath. "Captain Roberts," she began, her voice trembling slightly. I need to apologize." Maya raised an eyebrow, but remained silent, waiting for Karen to continue. Karen looked down at her hands, struggling to find the right words. "When I first saw you, I made assumptions about you, about your abilities, based on nothing more than, well, based on things that had no place in my thinking. I was wrong, and I treated you unfairly. I'm so sorry." Maya's expression softened slightly, but she still said nothing. Karen took this as a sign to keep going. "I saw how you handled the emergency today, how you kept everyone calm and safe, and how you helped that man," Karen said, her voice thick with emotion. "You didn't just prove me wrong. You showed me what true professionalism and leadership look like. I admire you, and I'm sorry for not seeing that sooner." Maya studied Karen for a moment, her dark eyes thoughtful. Then she nodded. "Thank you for saying that," she said quietly. "It takes courage to admit when we're wrong, and I appreciate your honesty." Karen felt a wave of relief wash over her. "I'm going to do better," she said, her voice firm. "You've taught me a lesson I won't forget." Maya gave her a faint smile. "That's all anyone can do, learn and grow. We're all human after all." The flight attendant approached, letting Maya know it was time for her to debrief with the crew. Karen stepped aside, but before Maya walked away, she extended her hand. Karen shook it firmly, feeling the warmth of Maya's grip. As Maya walked back toward the cockpit, Karen stood there for a moment, watching her go. The guilt she had carried since the beginning of the flight felt lighter now, replaced by a sense of humility and determination. She knew she couldn't undo her actions, but she could ensure they didn't define her moving forward. When Karen exited the plane, the terminal was bustling with activity. People rushed to their connecting flights or waited for loved ones, but Karen felt strangely calm. She had learned a valuable lesson that day, one about respect, grace, and the dangers of judging others too quickly. As she walked through the terminal, she noticed the young woman from the flight sitting near a window. The woman waved her over with a knowing smile. "Well," the young woman asked, "did you say what you needed to say?" Karen nodded, her face thoughtful. "I did. And I meant every word. The young woman smiled. Good. Maybe now you'll see the world a little differently. I already do, Karen replied, her voice soft but firm. She glanced toward the gate where Maya's plane was parked, then turned to leave. Her steps felt lighter, her heart less burdened. For Karen, this wasn't just a flight. It was the beginning of a new way of thinking. And for Maya, it was another day of proving, through actions, that character and skill speak louder than prejudice ever could.